What is up, YouTube? Today I'm coming back at you with another video, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. Today I'm going to be doing sort of a review video. Now, I've not done a review video sort of like this, but this is basically going to be a mini review slash order of best to worst movies in the Marvel MCU Phase 4. Now, I have seen every single Marvel movie in theaters, all the way from Iron Man all the way to the most recent ones. And I enjoy seeing these movies in theaters. I am a huge fan of superhero movies. But when I do movie reviews, I try to give as many unbiased points as possible. Obviously, my enjoyment of the movie does kind of add into my rating of the movie, but I also like to look at technical aspects, sort of like sound design, music, acting, all that sort of stuff. And so that all kind of goes into what I think of when I rate a movie or TV show or something like that. Now, as I go through these, I'm only going to be covering the MCU films. I'm not going to be covering any of the TV shows. Now, the reason for me not covering the TV shows is, number one, I primarily focus on collecting physical media and movies, and I have a large collection of movies, and so it's a very important aspect to me. Now, I will say that I have seen all of the MCU TV shows, but because they're not being released on physical media, and they probably will not be ever released on physical media, I am not going to take into account their ratings. But if you want the quick and dirty of what I think about the MCU TV shows, I'm gonna say I'm a little disappointed. I went into it very strong. I thought WandaVision was okay, but then Loki was amazing. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was okay. She-Hulk I hated. I absolutely hated She-Hulk. Moon Knight was really, really good. I would say Moon Knight and also Hawkeye are probably my two favorites of the MCU TV shows. And What If I didn't really like either. And yeah, so that's basically my quick and dirty of what I think of the MCU TV shows. But those aren't in any specific ranking. And I'm not really going to elaborate further because they're not in physical media, so I'm not going to go into it. But we will be going through all of the MCU Phase 4 movies, and I'll be going from worst to best. I own all of them on physical media, and like I said, I've seen all of these in theaters, so that will also influence my decision, because I did watch The Real Rejects. Coy did a review of basically this, and at one point he mentioned that watching them in theaters kind of gives you a different perspective, which I can see, and I guess will take some sort of influence on these movies, but I have watched all of these in theaters. I have also at least rewatched each of these at home once, and my viewing experience at home is essentially an OLED TV, got 5.1 surround sound, so it's a decent setup. Alright, so let's get right into it. Let's go the worst one first. So in my opinion, the worst movie of MCU Phase 4 is Thor: Love and Thunder. Now, I was very, very excited for this movie. During Phase 3, Thor Ragnarok was probably my second favorite Phase 3 movie, right behind Infinity War, and I was so pumped. I saw the trailers for this. The trailers looked super good. It had that Taika Waititi flair, and I went and saw this in theaters, and I just left underwhelmed. Now, I won't say like a lot of people take it to the extreme. This is the worst movie ever or whatever like that. It's not a bad movie, but it's just an average movie. It doesn't feel like an MCU movie. It just feels like an average, oh yeah, I watched that, and then you never think about it again. Because this movie has a serious identity crisis, and I don't think it works pretty much at all. There's basically two movies in this film, and those two movies are, Taika Waititi's very sarcastic comedy, lots of jokes and stuff like that, lots of good humor, and then there's whatever Christian Bale was in. And to be honest, when this movie opened up, it really hurt itself by setting the expectations extremely high, because you watch the opening scene with Christian Bale and his character's backstory, and it's strong, it's emotional, it's well acted, it's a seriously good dark, like, origin story for a villain in a superhero movie. And it immediately sets your expectations like, oh, this is going to be more than just a superhero movie. This is going to be something like The Batman or Joker or one of those more elevated superhero movies. But it's not. It wants to be, but it also wants to try to stay in the MCU, and it has those two themes really don't go well together. And I'm using examples from DC just because it's another superhero franchise, but it's like this movie should have been either shot completely the humorous way, which could have been done well. I don't think it is necessarily the reason it's bad is because of the humor. It could have been done well. Look at something like Peacemaker, for example. It does that sort of humor, that sort of setting. It knows what it is, it's tongue-in-cheek, and it doesn't take itself seriously. And I think it can work well in that sort of aspect. But when you mix it with something like an elevated superhero drama, like whatever Christian Bale was acting in, it just doesn't work. It doesn't blend well. And it's really, really sad because I want to see whatever movie Christian Bale was acting in. He is the best part of this movie. Christian Bale's acting is phenomenal. His backstory is tragic. It really makes you feel for the villain, and it's so good. But the bad part about it is he has almost no screen time. They spend so much other runtime on the movie and humor and going to fun, fantastic places, which would have worked fine if it wasn't for the entire gore storyline. So I think that the biggest issue in this film is it's two different movies that it didn't know what it wanted to be. And it really sucks because this is also the return of Natalie Portman's character, and we get Lady Thor, and I really wanted to see that play out in a good way. And for the entire runtime of the movie, it's just like she's just an afterthought, and it's just really unfortunate the way that this movie panned out. And if I had to do this movie, I would definitely say drop almost all of the humor, make it a serious drama about loss, because I think that would have been a strong point in the movie, because you have the loss of Jane, Lady Thor, you have the loss of Gore's daughter, and it would have really pulled together, I think, much better if you would have dropped a lot of the humor and really leaned into the aspect of loss. But that's basically, yeah, all I have to say about that one. I know I'm going really, really in depth in some of these, but... So the next one I would have to say is another one that I thought was very kind of middling. And I did see this one in theaters, and I'm one of the few lucky, well, I don't know how many people saw it in theaters, but I am lucky because this came out during the pandemic, and I was lucky enough that my AMC never, basically at every opportunity, was showing films. So I got to see things like Tenet in theaters, and that was like peak pandemic. I got to see this and some other movies. I go to the theaters a lot, but I did see this in theaters, and that's Black Widow. So this would probably be my second lowest on the list. Now, there were aspects of Black Widow that I really, really liked, and it was really well done. It had a different feel. I really appreciate the fact that this feels like an espionage film. However, I feel like it's just like an espionage light film, and I don't think it leans, like Love and Thunder, I don't think it leans heavily enough into the aspect that they were trying to go for. It feels sort of like someone took the outline to a Captain America film, and they were like, let's make it a little bit more espionage, but that's it. And I think it does a disservice to Black Widow as a character. I think there's too many things. I think it could have been simplified more and then really leaned into the backstory heavily. And what do I mean by simplify it more? I think Taskmaster should have just not been in this film. I think Taskmaster could have been introduced at a later point with Yelena's Black Widow. I think it could have been introduced there. But Taskmaster really kind of pulls the film down. I think it would have done much better as a person-to-person espionage drama where she's fighting off other widows that are under this mind control spell. I think it would have worked much better because at the end of the day, Taskmaster doesn't get much backstory at all. And it's a real shame because it's a really cool character. And I wish I could have seen her done a much better service. But she doesn't have any dialogue, which makes it hard to develop a character without dialogue, especially when you only see her in action scenes. Now, the backstory for Black Widow is very good. Florence Pugh's performance as Yelena is amazing. And the backstory of Red Guardian, I loved the Red Guardian in this movie. He is just the best worst person. And I really, really hope we see him return in the MCU, because I would love to see more Red Guardian. And I would love to see him finally face off against maybe like Anthony Mackie's Captain America. I think that'd be cool. But I feel like one of the biggest downsides to this is a technical aspect. The special effects were not there. I don't know why, but this has to be the worst special effects in the MCU. It reminds me of an early 2000s superhero movie. And it's not even like just noticing it on a 4K OLED. I noticed this in theaters too. I was like, the special effects just really aren't there. And that's saying something, because a lot of movie theaters, when they're blown up on a projector like that, you kind of get a soft haze to it, so it can really hide a lot of imperfections of CGI. But it doesn't. It didn't. And it just, the last act relied so heavily on CGI and explosions, it just really made it look kind of cheap. And it's a disservice to the character. I'm a little upset. And also, this is also another it's lower rated just because it doesn't tie into the rest of Phase 4. This is a backstory that takes place during Phase 2 and 3, and it's just, it doesn't really have any high stakes because you know how it ends. And it really serves as more of an introduction for the new Black Widow. And I do love her character, but I think this movie was about 5 years too late. I think it should have come out before Infinity War, and it would have made a lot more sense then. But other than that, I enjoyed the movie overall. Alright, the next movie is going to be controversial. I know that, because we're getting into now, the rest of these movies I consider much better. Those two, I think, had major flaws that would hinder the rewatchability of those films. The rest of these I could rewatch. They're really, really good, and I enjoy these movies, and it was hard to order the rest of these. But I know I'm going to get some flack for this one, but the next one I consider is Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, why? Why do I consider Spider-Man No Way Home the third lowest in Phase 4? It's because it relies heavily on nostalgia. Now, if you had never watched Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man or Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, it wouldn't have the same impact it does. Now, I did watch those franchises, and I loved them, especially Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. It was amazing to see him back in film as Spider-Man. I got goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, actually, and it was a special moment. However, I do not like that as a plot device. I do not think that the Member Berries plot hook is a good plot hook. I think it relies too much on previous experiences, and it makes the film not age well over time. And it's not going to age well over time. And I point to Star Wars The Force Awakens as a perfect example. I enjoyed The Force Awakens when it came out in theaters, and I thought it was really good. But as time has gone on, the more I've rewatched it, I'm just like, it's shallow. It relies too much on nostalgia, like remember the Millennium Falcon and all this cool stuff, and the Death Star, and just like the trench run. It does so much of the same. And this doesn't do it to that extreme, but there's quite a few moments in here where I'm just like, yeah, this is good, and I'm really enjoying watching William Dafoe return as the Green Goblin, and, you know, even Sandman makes an appearance. I I can't help but think that this is only going to get worse over time. And as much as I think that this is probably the best implementation of the multiverse, I don't think the story is as strong. Because the story relies on the previous arcs of franchises that weren't previously connected, it just doesn't hold the same sort of weight or stakes. Because if you have to think of it from the perspective of you've never seen Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man films. Because if you hadn't seen those, the villain's motives mean nothing to you, really. And in that context, yeah, there's some stakes with the death of Aunt May and the whole putting everything right and, you know, Tom Holland's Spider-Man graduating and all of that. It doesn't have the same weight. And so I don't think this one is going to hold up as well over time. Now, don't get me wrong, I love this movie. I actually have rewatched this probably one of the most out of the ones I've gotten. But objectively speaking, my enjoyment doesn't take as heavy as a weight as the story and just the characters. It feels, in a good way, like a comic book movie, but that's all it feels like. So I don't think this has anything extra special about it. I think this is a good comic book film, but if you haven't seen the previous referenced material, it's not going to be as good. So that's my thoughts on that. Now the next one is one that I was pleasantly surprised by. I had very low expectations going into this. I wasn't super excited to see this one, but like I said, I've seen every MCU film in theaters, so I had to go see this. And I was just like, all right, new MCU movie, not super stoked about this one, but I'll go watch it. And that is Shang Chi and the 10 Rings. And I actually genuinely loved this movie. When I watched this, I was like, wow, that was an amazing experience, because this offered you something more than just the MCU. And I think that's what the rest of these have in common, the rest of the films. Because it does something, the rest of these movies do something different than just the generic formula of MCU. Which is one of the reasons why I didn't even want to add the TV shows into this list, because they're so formulaic. The Shang-Chi offers you a sort of hint of the classic Kung Fu style movies. And I love those movies. I love Enter the Dragon and many of the Jackie Chan films. I think this has some of the best fight choreography of hand-to-hand combat. In fact, I think it does have the best MCU hand-to-hand combat choreography out there. And it really shows. It does long cuts. Thank you. I love long cut hand-to-hand action sequences. They are so much more enjoyable to watch than heavily cut things like Taken, for example. Like, you get like a half-second cut, half-second cut, half-second cut, and the camera's shaking all over the place. I don't know what's going on. Yes, it builds tension, but it also just builds confusion a lot of the time. This is phenomenal in the other direction. It really takes after a lot of Eastern films where there's long cut action sequences and set pieces of hand-to-hand combat. Like, I love, and I know everyone does, but I love the bus sequence in this film. It is such a epic intro to the main character's abilities. It is such a well done action sequence. And then you have the villain. I can't remember the villain's name, honestly. I really don't. But the villain, his motives are reasonable. They are, for all intents and purposes, just. It's just the way that he goes about fulfilling his desire or resolving the issue is flawed. And it makes him a flawed human being with a tragic backstory. And I think those are the best villains. I honestly do. You want to have something relatable to your villains. And I think that's one of the reasons why Thanos worked so well. Because his motives and his thought process made sense. And you could see that he wanted the best. It's just the way that he went about it was flawed and wrong. And I think that's the same the same thing in this film. And I think that's what makes the villain in this film so good and relatable. Now, what puts it at this spot? It was really hard because I enjoyed almost all of this movie. However, I think this movie should have just ended with Simu Liu's character facing his father. I think that's where it should have ended. That whole last battle with all the CGI monsters didn't really do it for me. And I think that's what brings this film down. Because not only did the visual effects not look that great, but it was just another big CGI monster fight. And it doesn't really do it for me. You would have to make it super special. Like, you can do big CGI monster fights well and make it feel good. Like, look, for instance, my favorite big monster movie with big monster fights is Kong Skull Island. I think that one does that phenomenally. I think it does it so well. This, it's serviceable. It's like, yeah, it's cool and fun to watch. It's a big spectacle, but in terms of the rest of the movie, I think it's unnecessary. I think it could have been completely cut. And I think it would have made a better film for it, but regardless, I still think it's a fantastic film. And it's one I'm definitely going to go back to, and I'm excited to see Shang Chi in more MCU stuff. And I'm in love with his fight choreography. It's so good. All right, the number 3 spot in the MCU Phase 4 for me personally is going to be controversial because I know a lot of people consider this the lowest, but I actually really like this movie, and that is The Eternals. I really love this movie. It is such a good dramatic piece. It shows the conflict of being something more than human much better than a lot of the MCU stuff. And I really like that because it shows that it shows a broader range of emotion than you get in a lot of the MCU. Other superhero movies have done it in the past, but for the MCU, I think this is probably one of the best in that aspect. I think the special effects were really good. The cinematography was very good. Some of the best cinematography in the MCU, I think, is in the Eternals, and that gives huge points to it because it is a gorgeous movie to watch. Absolutely amazing. I know a lot of people aren't a huge fan of the desaturated palette, but I think it adds another layer of the emotional, dramatic aspect of the film. And the villains, again, in this film, have reasonable drive. It just, Icarus is one of my favorite I think in this movie, Icarus is my favorite character. Number one, acting was phenomenal. I absolutely loved him in this movie. Such a well-picked actor for it. I think his motives made sense. I think you could feel the emotion in his performance, and you could feel the confliction in his performance, and you can feel his pain in trying to pick the greater good. And it's just a really well done performance, and I really enjoyed it. Now, what puts it at the number 3 instead of number 1 or 2? Well, I feel like this movie was very slow-paced. I think it needed it, but it is slow. You don't get a lot of action in here, and there are some performances that I did not love in this film. As much as I love Angelina Jolie as an actor, I just really didn't care for her in this film. And one of the reasons why is not because it was necessarily a bad performance. One of the things that I look for in a good film is an actor's performance has to make you forget who is acting as that character. And in the same movie, you have someone like Icarus, whose actor's name I just forget off the top of my head. But he's a huge actor, but he makes you forget every other film that he's done. And it makes you focus on his role in this. Angelina Jolie just didn't go that extra mile, I don't think. And I think every other every other character in the Eternals did. So it really kind of brought down the performance in that aspect. But also, it just left me wanting more. And I don't know what it is. I think this movie had two really good aspects to it that I think needed elaborated on. I think I wanted more of the backstory of the Eternals. I wanted more throughout history of the Eternals, because those scenes were really good. And then I also wanted more of the modern aspect of the Eternals too. Like, I wanted a longer drawn out process. I wanted to know more about Asherim? Is that his name? The big guy? I really wanted to know more about them. And the really big dudes. I can't remember what their names are right now. But I wanted to know more. And I feel like that is just I mean, it's a good thing to want to know more, but also, I don't think this has as much rewatchability for the same fact. So, I will say that I really, really enjoyed Eternals. I think it gets a lot of unneeded hate. I think it was amazingly shot, amazingly acted. The story was good. It was interesting. I just wanted more. And so I look forward to the Eternals 2, where maybe that can correct some of it and retroactively make this a better film. But for right now, I would say that this is going to be sticking in the number 3 spot. Alright, so number 2. I was so excited for this movie when it came out. And I am so happy that this movie was made in the way that it was made. And that is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now I know, again, a lot of people don't rate this one as highly as I do. But Sam Raimi was the best choice for this film. It added a much needed layer of something different to the MCU. And what I think that is it has a slight horror element. Now, do not get me wrong. This is not a horror film. I saw plenty of reviews of people saying, this is MCU's first horror film. It's not. It's really not. It's got horror elements at best, but it just... I just don't think that it is a horror film. I think it has horror elements at best. But what I do really enjoy about this is the multiversal aspect. This is what I was waiting for. All of Phase 4. You started off Phase 4 with Loki. Well, one of the things that started off Phase 4 was Loki. And it introduced the prospect of variants and the multiverse. And throughout Phase 4 I was like, where's the multiverse? When are we going to get to it? And I know that's just me being impatient, because a lot of Phase 4 seems like it was dealing with the fallout of Endgame, which makes sense. However, I feel like at least in the ending aspects you have to tie it together to the multiversal saga, because otherwise it just feels like No Man's Land films, which a lot of Phase 4 sometimes did feel like. This felt like direct consequences that tied into the multiversal saga, and I was here for it. I loved seeing all the different variants of Doctor Strange. They were so good. I loved seeing Sinister Strange in a live-action form. Well, I don't know if it was considered Sinister Strange, but evil Doctor Strange. I loved it. I loved seeing him. And then, I think this held up much better in the aspect of bringing in nostalgic casting, because unlike No Way Home, it brought in some nostalgic casting with Patrick Stewart's Professor Xavier, and that means something to me because I grew up with superhero movies. My first superhero movie I ever watched was 1989's Batman on VHS. I loved that movie growing up, and I remember when the Marvel movies finally started coming out and they were good, like Spider-Man. And I remember when I went to see the original X-Men in theaters, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I was a big X-Men fan. And I read the comics growing up. I watched the cartoon growing up. And I was so excited to see them. And seeing Professor X in this, but pulling him from the 90s cartoon, was an amazing choice, because it doesn't rely necessarily on nostalgia. But it's also still probably the perfect casting in a superhero movie. was Patrick Stewart, Professor Xavier. It doesn't get any more perfect than that. And seeing him in this was great. I absolutely loved it. But also bringing in multiversal variants of characters that don't rely on nostalgia, like having the Reed Richards not be from a previous movie. They could have easily pulled the Reed Richards from the early 2000s Fantastic Four movies, which would have been cool. But having a whole new Reed Richards, with an amazing performance, by the way, and then having Monica Rambeau as Captain Marvel was amazing, and then Captain Carter was amazing. I just really, really liked the 818 universe. I think it was really well done. But also seeing the drama and seeing one of our favorite heroes turn a villain is also really, really good. I really liked Scarlet Witch in this film. And another thing, I can't hammer this home enough, what makes the villain good in this movie is relatability. You understand what drives the character. She wants to see her children and wants to undo the loss of her children. And it makes sense. She's lost everything. It makes sense. It's a good driving force. It's relatable. But the way she goes about it is just flawed. And I think, again, makes for the best sort of characters. And I just think that this was really pulled together well. I think the sound design for this film was phenomenal. Whoever did the sound design, A+, really goes well with Sam Raimi's direction style. And then Danny Elfman for the soundtrack. Danny Elfman, Sam Raimi combination. You're in for a good time in terms of visuals and music. And I think it makes the movie stand out in the MCU. Because it doesn't feel like a normal MCU film. It feels more like an early 2000s like Marvel movie, but in the best ways. So I think this one is probably the second best in the Phase 4. And I'm looking forward to seeing more Doctor Strange in the future. And that leaves us off with my number one spot. So what is my number one film in Phase 4 MCU? Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. It was no contest. This movie is leagues above everything else in Phase 4, in my opinion. I think it works in every single way. The acting is just phenomenal by everybody in this film. Literally, every single actor was stellar. From the director, whatever her name is, that was introduced in the Winter Soldier show, whatever her name is. I'm really bad with names. That's even in person. Like when I meet people in person, I'm just terrible with names. It's just a flaw. I am just awful with names. But her character, even, amazing performance, and there's good twist with her character. And I didn't see it coming when I first watched it, to be honest. And I was like impressed. Like, good, you bamboozled me. Good job. And every character from Wakanda, oh my god, just so good. And I loved the new Black Panther. I think Shuri was probably the only choice that I could have seen being the new Black Panther. And this is coming from somebody who, my favorite Marvel character, so growing up, I read Marvel comics. I didn't read DC comics, but I watched DC movies growing up. But at the time, there weren't really any Marvel movies that were worth watching. And so, and my dad was into comics, and he always liked Marvel. So, I grew up reading 3 different comic books, or 3 different comic runs, and that's it, because I didn't have a lot of money to spend on comic books. But what I did read was Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Black Panther. And Black Panther has always been my favorite Marvel character. Just always been my favorite Marvel character. Just from, the suit has always been sweet. Now, am I a little salty that we don't get the cloak? A little bit. Do I think it would have looked super cheesy having the cloak? Yeah, probably. But it's whatever. I still think that the Black Panther suit is one of the best comic book to live action adaptations that we've seen. And Shuri's Black Panther suit is probably I do love Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther, but Shuri's suit is just, it's amazing. It's amazing. Now let's also get into the villain, because the villain in this film is probably my favorite villain of Phase 4. Namor is amazing. I love Namor. Like, it's, again, you see his perspective. He wants to protect his city. He wants to protect his people. He cares. He shows emotional depth, which is a big, big improvement, because some of the other villains that we've talked about, that is the biggest thing they're lacking, emotional depth. I do not like cartoonishly evil villains. I want them to have emotion. I want them to have things that they care about. And Namor cares about his people, and that is the driving force behind his motives. And you can see the actor who plays him, I don't even remember his name, but the actor who plays Namor, you can see his performance, the emotion just in his eyes. So well done. So well done. And I love the CGI in this movie is the best out of all of Phase 4. The CGI is the best in this. And Talotakan, I think is the name of the city, looks amazing. It looks so good. And as somebody who's actually been to the Yucatan and actually seen the buildings and the culture that this is based off of, it nails it. It really, really does. It really nails it in such a respectful way. Because not only does the villain have good motives, you can see his perspective, he's got an emotional depth, but also they feel threatening. Wakanda is the most powerful nation in the MCU, or so we thought. When we see Talotakan on screen, it makes Wakanda feel like every other nation feels to Wakanda. And I think that was a great route to go, because it shows the stakes are real, the stakes are high, and they are a genuine threat. And we see that multiple, yes, they are background characters, but they do die. And I think that really plays into the stakes of the film, and it really shows how powerful these characters are, and it shows how powerful Namor is. And I really appreciate it. You want a powerful villain with emotional depth, with relatable motive and drive. And this has it all. And not only that, but cinematography, absolutely amazing. Visuals were great, just the establishing shots, the different areas you visit, the color depth, the use of color, the use of slow-mo and dramatic scenes, just the way it was shot and the visual effects was just a league above everything else that we've seen in Phase 4. And then we also have the soundtrack. The soundtrack was amazing. It fits perfectly. I loved the soundtrack of this film. It works so well with the movie. And then it knows when to be silent, which is another really good aspect. And it pulls the heaviness out of the film. It was well done in every single aspect. And it's the only film, I think, in Phase 4 that could compare to like the heavy hitters in the MCU, like Infinity War or Thor Ragnarok. I think this is the only one that gets to that level. And it just so happens to be my favorite Marvel superhero. So I love this film. And I'm so excited to see Shuri grow as the Black Panther and just see her in more things. So I'm super excited. But I'm also really hopeful that we see Namor again, because Namor was one of the best villains I've seen in the MCU, hands down. I absolutely loved him. I loved his people. I loved his people. You could tell that they look up to him and as a source of inspiration, and you could feel the emotional connection between his people and him. And it just wasn't him to his people, but also the people had an emotional connection to him. And I think that was really moving, and I thought that was really well done. And just everybody in this film, just A+ acting, really well done. So, yeah, I'll stop rambling on now. I've been rambling for 40 minutes, but that is my thoughts on Phase 4 MCU films exclusively. And yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment box below. This was sort of inspired by the Real Rejects video, and it'd be cool if they, watched it, but I don't expect them to. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment box below. What were your favorite MCU Phase 4 films? What was your ranking? What do you think of my ranking? And what are you excited for about Phase 5? And yes, before anyone asks, I have seen the new Ant-Man movie. Like I said, I see every Marvel movie in theaters, and I thought it was okay. I don't think it was as bad as people are saying. I don't think it deserves to be rated as lowly as Thor: Love and Thunder. I think it's better than Thor: Love and Thunder. I think it's more akin to maybe like, I would probably say like the Eternals. I thought it was good. I thought it had a lot of good redeeming qualities. I loved Kang in that movie, but there were some flaws. There were some flaws for sure. Actually, no, I'd probably put it more on Black Widow level, because I think it has more in common with that. It has some really good stretches of moments, but then there's like tidbits of like, didn't really work for me. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment box below. Thank you guys for watching. If you watched it all the way to the end, you're amazing. And thank you to all of my subscribers. I think I hit 800 subscribers, and it really means a lot to me. And I hope you guys enjoy my content as much as I enjoy making content for you. I'm not monetized, so I only do this for the enjoyment of the dialogue between me and you. And yeah, so let me know what you guys think in the comment box below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.